Good morning, and thank you for joining us, Sarah. Sarah is the president and CEO of Common Ground Alliance. Common Ground Alliance, which, by the way, recently held its annual conference in Colorado this week, is a stakeholder-run organization dedicated to preventing damage to underground utility infrastructure and, of course, protecting those who live and work near these very important assets. Sarah, before joining Common Ground Alliance's president and CEO, served as a vice president of strategic initiatives for the American Fuel and Petrochemical Manufacturers, which is a DC-based trade association. She held various positions in the energy industry. She was with America's Natural Gas Alliance, the United States, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Institute for 21st Century Energy, the American Petroleum Institute, the U.S. Department of Energy as a White House liaison, and a senior advisor in the Office of Policy and International Affairs. Sarah was also appointed by the Secretary of Transportation to the department's Liquid Pipeline Advisory Committee, which provides guidance to the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Sarah, thank you again for joining us this morning.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Awesome. So how did your conference in Colorado go?
It went amazingly well. We had a record-breaking attendance of nearly 1,500 damage prevention professionals, and we talked a lot about the next generation of damage prevention, what we can do to keep homeowners safe, what we can do to make sure that crews go home to their families every night, and we keep our community safe and connected.
Now, when you say damage prevention professionals, who are we talking about exactly?
So we are talking about those who focus on making sure that the utilities that are running underground stay intact, that when we are putting in new infrastructure, that we don't damage anything else. And those are the people that they do this every day. Whenever you see construction crews out there, there's a damage prevention professional somewhere who's had something to do with that.
And when you say damage to the underground infrastructure, obviously I know about pipelines. I know about fiber optics, if you're lucky enough to have fiber optics. But what else could potentially get damaged?
Well, so all the things that you have in your house, water, power, sewer, fiber, gas, electric, are often buried underground. And so in order to make sure that communities stay connected and that those resources are reliable, we want to make sure that we always know where they are before any digging begins around them.
And what have been, we've heard all kinds of stories, right? A gas explosion,
Yes.
a pipe bursting. But what are some of the more horrific things that your members have seen?
Well, unfortunately, it can be as minuscule as, an irritating cutoff of your Wi-Fi, but it can also be catastrophic and lead to loss of life.
And in terms of damage, what are we talking about? How many billions of dollars in damages do you usually see every year?
So annually, we believe it costs about $30 billion annually. And frankly, that was actually before the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act was passed. And so I would expect that it's probably more than that because we've seen an uptick in damages as we've increased our construction activity. So even in Colorado, buried utilities are damaged over 14,000 times every year. That's 38 incidents a day. It threatens public safety. It disrupts businesses. It can end up shutting down businesses or schools or having to evacuate a city block. And it can be a real challenge for communities.
So, I'm a homeowner, and the last time I was trying to figure out if we're going to do some digging was we were figuring out we were going to put up some fencing, and a couple guys I talked to, and some of them came out, and one of the five said, "Hey, you got to make sure you call 811." And as a homeowner, whose responsibility is it to call 811? Is it my responsibility or is it the contractor's responsibility?
Well, and it depends. It's your house, it's your property, so you are ultimately responsible for what happens on your property. So I would always encourage every homeowner, if they're doing their own work, even if they've hired somebody to help them, they need to make sure they've called. However, depending on the work, the professional contractor is usually obligated to call 811. But it's incumbent upon the homeowner to make sure that has happened.
It's not a bad idea to check, right? To say, hey, have you
That's
called
right.
811? And how
That's
do you know that the contractor has called 811? Like, what do you see on the ground? Do you see like flags, for example?
Well, there are a number of ways you can check. One, they should have a ticket number from Colorado 811. And two, if there are utilities or infrastructure in the area in which you're planning on digging, there will be flags or paint on the ground, and each of those colors means a different utility is there.
And ideally, we live in a world where right now where instant gratification is sort of the primary goal. We want things done really, really
Right.
quickly. But you recommend that we actually wait a couple days, right? If you're doing some digging, thinking of doing that over the weekend, do it on a Monday if you're doing it on a Saturday or a Sunday, for example.
The law requires that you wait 2 days. That
2 days.
varies slightly from state to state, but in Colorado, it's 2 days. And so you need to call, and that is something that homeowners need to be aware of. If you plan on doing a weekend warrior project, putting in a new mailbox, putting in a fence, planting trees, you need to make sure you've called, because often there can be, your gas line, your fiber optic line, and you certainly don't want to be the person that cuts off the internet to your entire neighborhood.
I'm sorry, did you say you got to call even if you're putting in a mail post, for example?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Some assets can just be a few inches underground.
I actually know somebody who lost their internet just a few days ago. The aeration guy came in, aerated the lawn and cut something. I I didn't think that the fiber optics were buried that close to the surface, but apparently in her case it is.
Well, and they may not have even started that way, but if you're in an area that floods or you get a lot of water, there could be some ground movement. But the fact of the matter is, especially when you're talking about, those distribution lines, if you will, right? You could have a shallow line, but the point is we don't ever want to take that risk.
In terms of support from the federal government, what have you seen so far? Let me back up a bit. You mentioned about the infrastructure spending that
Mhm.
we are going to see if we haven't seen it already,
Right.
effectively flooding, across the country. I know that the guys who are really keen on having fiber, optic fiber in the rural areas, they're getting a ton of money from the feds as a result of the infrastructure law that we passed. And so we're going to see a ton of digging.
Mhm.
And so I'm wondering, how, I guess the question is, what help are you getting? What kind of help are you getting from the federal government? And I guess more importantly, what can local officials in Colorado do to prevent the kinds of damages that you outlined?
Unfortunately, in the Bipartisan Infrastructure Act, there was no money directed towards damage prevention, which is unfortunate. The Common Ground Alliance is a C3. We don't lobby. So it was unfortunate that that was not something that was included in that language with the significant amount of money that is being distributed across the country. However, states do have the opportunity to act. And certainly in some of the programs that they're looking at when they're giving away money via grant or looking at requirements to dig or put in new infrastructure, the states can actually say, okay, here's some of the criteria that we want you to have before you start digging in our community. So that is one way. And the local government in Colorado and Colorado Springs has been very supportive of damage prevention. Governor Hickenlooper actually established the Underground Damage Prevention Safety Commission in 2018. We had a variety of visitors to our event who were interested in damage prevention. And so we really thank the local officials for supporting damage prevention. And we just want to continue to elevate it as an issue because it is something that really, really can impede this idea of undergrounding for reliability and safety. If we spend the resources to underground these assets so that they're not prone to flooding or fires or, wind damage, that's great, but not if a excavator comes in and hits the line because it was mismarked or it wasn't on a map. And now you have an entire street you're going to have to dig up, or a sidewalk, and that can be a significant amount of downtime.
And just to be clear, each home in
Mhm.
theory is mapped out. Like people know where the lines are, and that information exists somewhere.
The homeowner probably does not. However, that is why you call a 811. The process is if you're doing a project, you call 811, then 811 will notify those that may have assets in that area to come mark them. So the whoever the fiber carrier is, the gas carrier, the water and sewer, or those that may have assets, and they come in and mark them. And then when you see the paint on the ground, that is when you know there is something there. We need to dig with care there. We need to make sure that we don't dig into that line.
So, I see those markings on the streets. Is that
Mhm.
what you're talking about? So those like
Yes,
weird markings I see in bright
yes,
orange or red
or red.
or
Yes,
red.
yes.
Okay, that's what
So,
that's what they are. Got
and
it.
each one of them, no matter where you go, that color, they all mean the same thing. So, orange is always going to be telecommunications fiber. Red is always going to be, power. So, they all mean something. So now, when you walk across the street, you're going to go, "Oh, I know what that is."
Oh, that's great. I didn't know that. You mentioned some new technologies that are emerging or being developed. What are some of those?
So, obviously, mapping is key to making sure that we're locating accurately and ensuring that we're protecting those assets. And so, the one call process was set up. It'll be 25 years ago. Um, let's see, in 20 and pardon me, CGA will be founded 25 years ago next year. But once the one call law became established, that is really when we started seeing it. You call 811 no matter where you are in the country, and you will be routed to that one call center.
I think those are all my questions. Is there anything else that I haven't asked? Anything else that you want to highlight?
I just want to reiterate that, safety is key here. And we want to make sure that we keep our community safe, and that everybody that is working to, help uh, update our infrastructure is goes home safely at night. And so it's really important that we think about the consequences of what could happen when we don't call 811 before digging.
Sarah, thank you again for your time. Appreciate it. And
Great.
enjoy
Thanks
the
so
rest of
much.
the day. Enjoy the rest of your day, okay?
Thanks. Take care.
Okay, bye for now.
Bye bye.